Good morning. Today is September 5th, 2021. And our topic today is reaching higher, reaching higher. And I put a little subtext to that, a subtitle, uh, looking to the divine. So really what we mean by reaching higher is reaching to the spiritual realms. We might even say reaching deeper because it is within us. But I would like to share a reading from Ernest Holmes, the founder of our movement, Science of Mind. Excuse me. And the title of it is, I Open the Door of My Consciousness and Welcome the Divine Guest. The healing Christ comes with the directness into the mind of all who receive him. This Christ is the incarnation of God in the individual soul. Spirit has imparted itself to all persons. This divine incarnation, this living presence at the center of our being is Christ, the soul of every living person. We do not will this presence into existence, nor do we by declaration, affirmation, or demand command it. We do not court it by false humility, nor engage its attention merely by admiration. The presence, the power is already there. It is willingness, acceptance, and recognition that give entrance to the divine presence. It is faith and acknowledgement that permit its creative power to flow through our world. Therefore, quote, I lift mine eyes unto the hills, in parentheses, the divine presence within me, in parentheses, from whence cometh my strength. That's a Bible quote. So the affirmation is, I will look long and earnestly, sincerely and simply upon every object and every person until this presence is revealed. I will wait at the doorway of my expectation until my acceptance grants my mind the privilege of, quote, beholding God's face forevermore, end quote. But I will not wait too long, for today I expect to see God's shining presence revealed. Today I expect to don the seamless robe of divine union. Today the Most High is revealed in my life. And so it is.
And I would suggest we could start by earnestly looking for that divine within ourselves.
Well, exactly. And I love that the entrance is not commanding it or even affirming it or any of that we learn to do in treatment, but it is willingness, acceptance,
and recognition.
And recognition. So we have to know it's there, to know it's working for us. And that is the big gift, actually, of this teaching, is to know the presence of the divine is within you and every other person. But it doesn't work for them until they know it's there. And certainly it hadn't worked for me until I knew it was there. And that was a big, big change in my life.
I'm not sure why, but the word willingness particularly stands out for me today. That because I think we often think we have to say yes, and that yes, there is an automatic response, but sometimes it's just a matter of being willing. Being willing to step into the space where acceptance and recognition is a possibility. We step in for a moment, nothing happens, and then we step back out. And so that willingness becomes important. The willingness is also like a question, living in a question, a possibility, rather than living in a conclusion that someone else has given us or that we're waiting to have with a stamp of approval.
I realized this morning in my meditation that often I feel like, I've learned the tools. I've learned the tools of affirmation and treatment and healing, prayer. And so, but what that has often amounted to in my life is I feel responsible then for making the healing happen for myself and my loved ones. And I realized this morning, it's not I that doeth the works. As Jesus said in the Bible, it is the Father within that doeth the works. And this is a huge release. It's a huge release. I don't have to exercise my perfectionism in doing all the right things, and I can release it to the inner wisdom of my body and the Christ within. I love also that he states that Christ is the soul of every living person. He doesn't say this Christ is just in Christians. He says that Christ is the soul of every living person, whether they call it that or not.
I'm reminded of when years ago in a land far, far away from here where we had long winters and lots of snow. I remember getting into the car in the morning, and the question was, of course, will the car start? And in cold weather and years ago when batteries weren't as good as they are now. And so what I found myself doing was, before I turned the key on, was leaning forward and turning the key on, like somehow I could lean it into turning on. And I think sometimes we spend an awful lot of time leaning into something that in fact all we have to do is simply say yes and allow. And the leaning part really never started the car. The battery had to be well enough charged or warm enough.
There was the
to be,
hiking of the shoulders too, right? The
that,
turning
yeah.
of the key
And
and
oh, I
I
hope it
hope it
works. I hope it
starts.
works. Oh, there's a whole ritual that you can go through. But I think we actually often do that. We go to church or we go to wherever we go to, and we lean forward and we put our hands in the right position because we know God's watching. And we pray with the right. I used to, whenever I would do a prayer, I tried to get the grammar correct because I knew God was a grammar specialist. So the right words, and suddenly when you say, I need a lot, no, thou needest a lot. So, and you begin speaking in a different English and everything because you want God to hear it in the language he prefers, of course, which is, whatever the Bible was translated into.
King James version.
King James version of English. I think, what are you doing? If God were there listening, say, come on, just talk to me. Thouest must really. But I think we need to look at our own rituals that we go through that say, I'm really not sure. I don't necessarily trust. If everything isn't exactly right, it won't work. And we need to be willing to say, everything is where it needs to be, and it will work just fine because that's how it was designed to work.
Yes. I've got some wonderful quotes because we're talking about reaching higher, meaning reaching to the divine for connection, for love, for help, for assistance. This is a quote from Carolyn Mace. You may know her, MYSS, Carolyn Mace. And she says, to fulfill your divine potential and even to resolve the many issues of daily life, you must enlist a higher plane of consciousness. You must get beyond reason to where you can see and understand the symbols of greater meaning of the experience. Your quest for meaning is in itself a form of spiritual practice. Questions such as, why have I been born? And how do I find the voice of God within me? Are in fact spiritual invocations, prayers that are answered not in words, but through experience. These questions activate your divine potential. I love that. That's also a form of reaching higher, just asking questions. As a matter of fact, last month we focused on guidance a lot. And one of the things I neglected to add as a technique for receiving guidance is to ask questions, especially in meditation, to ask a question and then just be still. And you likely will not get the answer right then, but that you've asked the question in meditation, it will come to you. I find it comes to me sometimes then, sometimes later. But asking questions is a very important tool for reaching higher.
I think another dimension of all of this that I want to talk a little bit about is that without realizing it, if we are always writing a story, and the story that we're writing is often unconscious. So what I'd like to invite you to do, and something I've been doing more recently, which has been interesting for me, is if I stopped everything right this minute, if I could stop all the activity of my mind and say, okay, what is this story about and how does it end? You see, because we're constantly updating our story and the ending to the story. And what I've observed is very often the ending is fear-based, and the story may not reveal the fear, but it is nevertheless the activity of daily living often reflects an unspoken ending, and the unspoken ending is often a fear-based ending. And so what if, when you stop the moment and said, why am I anxious, or why am I uncomfortable, or why am I worried, or why am I working so hard? Why does everything have to be perfect? What does the end of the story tell me? What is the end of the story revealing to me about what I'm doing right now? If you look at a movie,
The story that you're telling
yeah,
yourself, right?
if you look at a movie, wherever you stop the movie, you know that everything that's happened up until that time has something to do with the ending. It's all tied together. There's a continuity. Well, in fact, there's a continuity that we have too, and we're storytellers. Whether we want to be or not, we're storytellers. Part of that is because we want to have conclusions that make sense to us that we can live with. And so what I see us doing very often is living a story with an unspoken unhappy ending. And what I'm suggesting is that at any point in time, just stop your activity and say, if this were a story, or if this were a movie, how would it end? And how do I need to change it? Either the activity that I'm now engaged in, or how could I mentally change the ending? I was talking to Judith today about it this morning. I said, it'd be interesting if we were driving to Tallahassee, which is our capital in Florida, to collect the $340 million lottery. Would that be a different drive to Tallahassee than if we were driving to Tallahassee to make a court appearance because we were on trial for something? The journey would seem to be the same, but the potential outcome is huge. I think we would have different conversations. I think we would be very different people on that whole trip. So the trip really is not the issue. The trip is what we're doing, but what does it look like at the end? What have we imagined for ourselves at the end? What if you imagined for the end of your journey that the divine would be working through you in the most transparent and most beautiful and most perfect way ever imaginable? What if you imagined
And
right
through
now
others.
that, and through other, that you are that divine expression, that I got it, I am that. And now I have to kind of keep it quiet because other people won't understand, but nevertheless, that's who I really am. As opposed to, God, I hope this works out. I don't want to go to hell. And I think unspoken, a lot of us grew up with a notion of heaven and hell.
Or debtor's prison.
Yeah, and we're still living, we're actually living that story. We still at the end of it, I hope I did enough good to compensate for the bad. I hope that all the good I did will reward me. What was the reward we were told of when we were kids? That if you do everything right in this world, then you'll go to heaven. And if you don't, we know what's going to happen to you. So take a look at that story that you're telling yourself without noticing that you necessarily are. And especially notice when you feel a great deal of pressure in the moment. Is that pressure about what's going on now? Or is that pressure an affirmation that I'm not good enough? I'm not really connected. It's never going to end that well. Things aren't going to be okay. If that's the message that the story is telling you, then you have a pretty horrible ending.
Yeah, and be sure. I mean, some of you may say, well, I don't relate to this. I'm not doing that. We all have a story. We all have a story. So the goal is to find out what story it is you're telling yourself.
And if you're not telling a story, because you're the one person in a million who just doesn't do that, and you've never done it, make one up anyway. Make up
Make up a good one.
make up a good story with a happy ending,
Exactly.
and watch what happens.
Speaking of which, I want to tell a story. And this is a story that I
love this.
reposted on Facebook, but it's just so wise. And again, this is in the vein of seeing the divine in everyone, because that's our goal too. We want to reach higher, not just for ourselves, but to also see this in everyone so that we may treat them as equally divine beings. So there was an old man sitting on a park bench, and a young man in his 30s approached him and said, Sir, do you remember me? And he looked up at him. He said, No. And he said, Well, I was a student of yours. And he gave his name, and the teacher didn't remember him. And he said, Well, I remember you. As a matter of fact, I became a teacher because of you. And the old man says, Oh, really? And he said, Yes. There was a boy in the class. I think they were 9 or 10 years old. There was a boy in the class who came in with a new watch, and I really wanted that watch. So I stole it and put it in my pocket. And the boy realized it was gone and went to you and said, Somebody has stolen my watch. So you had all of us come up to the front of the room, make a circle, and ask us to close our eyes. And you went around and put your hand in our pockets until you found it in my pocket and pulled it out and said to us, "Now you can open your eyes. We found the watch." You returned the watch to the owner, but you never told him.
And you never have me lose my dignity.
You what?
Never caused me to lose my dignity.
Never caused me to lose my dignity. You never told anyone that I was the thief. And the old teacher looked at him and said, "I had my eyes closed too."
And you know, and he added,
So he never wanted to know who the thief
no,
was.
I didn't want to act like the person would have to act who knew who the criminal was. I wanted to treat everybody with respect and with dignity and allow them to learn from that lesson.
And what a lesson that is.
Really.
What a lesson that
I would
is.
have done the same thing, except with one eye open.
Because as human beings, we so want to be right. And often that it means making sure that the person we think is wrong knows that they are wrong.
Well, if we could teach ourselves as well as teach others through positive affirmation rather than negative affirmation, things would go very differently. I was telling Judith earlier, years ago, when I first started working in mental health, we would do group therapy. And at the end of the group therapy, all of the people who, at this point, because it was a teaching hospital, who were being trained on how to do group therapy, all of us therapists would go back behind the mirror and discuss what had happened. And every single time, Dr. Klein, who was a psychologist, would say, "And Bob, what do you think happened?" And I would tell him what I thought happened. And he would, and I was always telling him about the content of what happened. That is, this person said this person said that, and I think that's what it means. And he would nod his head and say, "Thank you," and go on. He never made me wrong. He never suggested I look at things differently. One day, I'm watching the group and I suddenly realized that what was going on in the group was not the content of the conversation, but underneath it, what we call the process and how people were relating to one another and who spoke and why they spoke had more to do with what was going on than the content.
So these are issues of power or
Yeah,
safety
yeah,
and
and
things like that.
who's coming to leadership and
Mhm.
so, and as you know, when you're talking to someone very often, you may have a hidden agenda or an unconscious agenda that has nothing to do with the conversation. I didn't know about any of that. So in any event, he went around and that psychologist went around and said, "So what do you think, Bob?" And I said, I understand now. There was a process going on, and this is what I think was going on. At which point he started clapping his hands in front of everybody. And he said, "You now understand the difference between process and content." And I said, "Wow." Now, I thought that was a big point of learning, huge for me. And I really appreciated that. But I tell you what, what I discovered talking to Judith about it today for the first time, and I hadn't really thought about it before, was all of the times I spoke after the group about something that was incorrect and not on target, that missed the point, and he never could have made that point to me. How patient he was, how considerate he was, and how kind he was to say, "Thank you, Bob," as opposed to, "Oh my God, you still haven't got it." Which I would have probably said, that was, "Come on, wake up." And so this is just one more example to me of people helping you with your awakening rather than telling you that it's not a good idea to be asleep or making you wrong for not being as awake as is possible for you. And that invitation to awaken has to start with us, not making ourselves wrong, but saying, "This is what I know right now. Now let me go the next step."
As you often say, and I know you're quoting someone, I think I can't think of his name right now. We're all just walking each other home.
Oh yeah.
Ram Dass said that,
Yeah.
I believe. We're all just walking each other home. And so when we do that, when we see the divine in others and we have patience with them and we don't need to make them wrong and we let them move at their own pace, we're all just walking each other home. So I have another story of people saving each other. Actually, in 1981, a Dr. Michael Shannon worked around the clock to keep a 3.2-pound baby alive after the boy was born prematurely. 30 years later, the pediatrician was in a car accident, pinned inside a burning vehicle. A paramedic, Chris Trokey, pulled him to safety. Chris was the baby boy who Michael had saved 3 decades ago. So they saved each other's lives. And I think that's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to do. And also when you see the divine in others, it it makes you feel better and it lifts
Mhm.
everybody up. So even when we look at the world of politics, which is so divided of us versus them, if we could try to look for the divine in everything and everyone, and just know that they're all doing just the best they can, given what they know and believe, and let it be, let it be, and don't do an ain't it awful, because it doesn't do anything but distress you.
Whenever you start a conversation with look stupid, which is often an unspoken conversation. I got that you don't understand and that you haven't been informed and you're not educated and you're really kind of dumb, but I mean, I'm going to be compassionate anyway. And that compassion does not seem to go very well because the person's already received the initial message that they don't count, they're not important, or they're wrong. And however wrong you think somebody is, how wrong you think they are has a larger impact on them and their ability or your ability to get past it.
Yes, indeed. I'm tempted to talk about an event that happened this week in current events, but I think I'll pass on that.
Good.
Good idea, huh? So Ernest Holmes had this to say. He said, "Our highest satisfaction comes from a sense of conscious union with the invisible life, finding such an inward wholeness that all sense of fear, doubt, and uncertainty vanishes." That's what we're talking about for reaching higher. You can all, or reaching within, however you want to view that. That is really the answer to all problems. When you can do that, it doesn't matter how bad the situation is right now on the outer that you would like to condemn, whatnot. You can always find that peace and love that is within you, loving you right now, supporting you,
I'm reminded of
lifting you up.
reminded of early parenting. And I remember telling my son, if you run like that in the house with that in your hand, you're going to fall and you're going to hurt yourself. And I'm telling you, please don't do that. And I'm asking you not to do that. And I'm letting you know. And of course, what my son did was completely ignore me
Of
and
course.
run and fall. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't say, Aaron, I can't love you anymore because you didn't take my word. I can't treat you like a child anymore, that you are my child, because in fact you defied what I said and that's it. No, I said, I warned you. Now you've learned what you need to learn. Let me hug and love you. Let me care about you, because that's never going to be an equation that we have to play with. I think what we do very often is we say, I want you to do what I'd like you to do. And if you don't, I will withhold my love. I will withhold my friendship. I will block you if you are on my Facebook. I will unfriend you and I will let everybody know I unfriended you. And the reason that I'll do that is because it gives me a sense of control or somehow vindictive retribution. But the bottom line is, if you love somebody and they do something that doesn't match what you believe things should happen, you can still love them. Even if you have to keep them at arm's length or you have to be careful how you relate to them, but you can still love them. And wouldn't they do better if they knew they were loved than if they thought, in addition to acting differently than you believe, now you no longer love them?
Right.
And that
Right.
takeaway is more toxic and more lethal than the condition very often that causes us to take ourselves away.
You know, Daniel Nahmad flew in from California. He's a musician of New Thought music. He wrote the song "One Power" that we love, and he got his start. He was a congregant in the Chicago Center, and he wanted to do music. He just wasn't a musician or singer yet, and so he started out in the Chicago church. I think it was the Evanston, Illinois church,
It was.
and under Bill and Elizabeth Arrett, the co-pastors. And every time he played, they just told him he was so great, that he was just great. And that gave him the confidence to continue going and not only go more there, but to move to California, where there were more churches like ours that he could play at. And he came to our Sillamar, our annual conferences. We saw him many, many times. At the memorial service of Reverend Bill Arrett, just the 22nd of August, he shared that He said, if you want to boost somebody up and help them, just tell them how great they are. He said, because I never would have made it if they had not told me every time I played how great I was.
Well, and on a scale of 1 to 10, when I first saw him, and he'd already been singing for quite a while, I would say he was possibly at a 5.
Right.
When I saw him 5 years later, he was at an 8. When I see him now, I think he's as close to 10 as you can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wonder if somebody had given him that rating when he began.
Yeah.
Thank
You're really just a 5.
thank you for singing, but that was a 3. And we'd like you to work to a 5, which will only be halfway to where you want to go, not anywhere near as good as the people that you want to sing with. Wow. And it would have been accurate, but it wouldn't have been true.
Helpful.
And it wouldn't have been true, because what we would need to do, if we can, is to look for that higher, that better, that is within the individual, that we can cultivate, rather than assessing them to be less than.
And so I would like to give you that recommendation too, with working with your family members and loved ones.
I don't recommend it for family, just leave them alone.
No, I do. When you try, well,
Yeah.
I just want to tell you what's wrong with you, because I'm just
Yeah.
trying to help you.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
It doesn't work. It's more the other one of just telling them what is good about them. They know better than you do what their failings are,
Mhm.
and it doesn't do any good for you to tell them. So just keep lifting them up, keep reaching higher, and they will go higher.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good note to end on.
Thank you. Yes. So with that, let's do a closing prayer.
And then we're going to
Okay.
have some music, and we're going to have our
Yes.
offering.
Yes. Okay. So let's go within now and know that the truth of our being, each one of us, is that the divine is within us. It is there waiting quietly, patiently. And when we acknowledge it and are willing to be helped by it, we call upon it and know it is the Father within that doeth the works. And we allow it to create abundant health and well being within ourselves and within our loved ones. And we give thanks for knowing that this is the truth, for feeling that this is the case. We give thanks. We look forward to practicing this. We look forward to reaching higher, reaching deeper, and allowing life to unfold in its perfection. We release, and together we say, and so it is. And so I'm going to stop the recording now.